If I had known that the people I loved most would one day turn into the very storm that shattered my peace, maybe I would have noticed the warning signs sooner, but life rarely gives warnings. I was never the type of woman who expected luxury. All I ever wanted was a calm home, a small family, and a chance to build something honest with someone who cared. When I married Darren, we were barely out of our teens, filled with naive certainty that love alone would protect us from the world's cruelty. He worked small repair jobs across town, and I cleaned people's homes for whatever pay I could manage. We saved every spare coin we found, dreaming of better days. When our son Leo was born, I was 25. They wrapped him in a faded green blanket one of the neighbors gifted me, and his tiny eyes held a purity I'd never seen before. In that moment, I made a silent promise, one I lived by every single day, that I would give him a life far brighter than the one I came from. For a while, Darren seemed happy too. He took double shifts, fixed anything the neighbors requested, and tried to keep our tiny rented apartment running. Those early years were simple but beautiful. We ate dinner together every night, talked about dreams that felt impossibly big, and told ourselves that things would eventually get easier. But life rarely unfolds the way you hope. When Leo turned 5, everything split apart. One morning, Darren sat across from me with an expression I still struggle to forget. He told me he'd met someone else. No apology. No explanation, just cold finality. Before I could even take in the words, he packed a single duffel bag and walked out the door, taking every bit of our savings with him. I stayed frozen for hours after he left. That night, I cried until my body gave up. But morning came, and so did reality. My little boy needed a mother who didn't crumble. So I wiped my tears, tied my hair back, and pushed myself forward because I had no other choice. I took a nighttime job cleaning office buildings, and during the day I watched Leo while sewing for neighbors whenever they requested custom work. I slept 3, maybe 4 hours a night, but I never let my son go without food, warmth, or school supplies. He grew into a bright, curious boy who hugged me every day as if he knew how hard I was fighting. And I kept fighting because I believed love would someday return the favor. But I didn't know then that my greatest heartbreak wasn't Darren leaving, it was still waiting for me, growing inside the very child I sacrificed everything for. What happened next will leave you breathless. When you work every day to build a future for your child, you never imagine that the same hands you nurtured might someday push you toward your deepest breaking point. Years passed, and my entire world revolved around Leo. Every uniform he wore, every lunchbox I packed, every fever I soothed, I carried it all alone. But I didn't resent it, not once. Because he was my purpose, my anchor, my reason to rise on days when exhaustion dragged at my bones. By the time Leo reached his late teens, he transformed from that tender-eyed boy into a tall, confident young man. He talked about wanting more from life, opportunities, freedom, a chance to escape the small town that had trapped us in struggle for so long. I understood him, I even encouraged him. I wanted him to chase dreams I never had the luxury to pursue. So when he told me he wanted to study in a larger city, I supported him without hesitation. I worked overtime, took on extra sewing jobs, skipped meals when necessary, and saved every bit of money I could. I even sold the tiny gold anklet my mother had given me before she passed away. It hurt, but Leo's future mattered more than any heirloom. He left home at 20, waving goodbye with excitement shimmering in his eyes. As the bus pulled away, I whispered, "Make something of yourself, my boy." I didn't know that life in the city would change him in ways I wasn't prepared for. Months later, I noticed a shift. His calls became shorter, his tone colder, he visited less and less, always offering vague excuses. When he did come home, he carried himself differently, more distant, more impatient, as if my presence made him uncomfortable. But I told myself all mothers go through this. Children grow, they create new worlds. They don't mean to forget the old ones. Then came Myra. She was Leo's new partner, a woman with sharp words and an even sharper gaze. Beautiful, yes, but with a strange arrogance that clung to her like perfume. She rarely acknowledged me, and when she did, her tone held a subtle sting, like she saw me as nothing more than a burden Leo had outgrown. I ignored it. I told myself relationships were complicated and I didn't want to cause him trouble. I welcomed her with the same warmth I gave anyone who stepped into my home. But as weeks turned into months, Myra's behavior hardened. She commented on how messy my little home was, how old-fashioned my habits seemed, how Leo deserved a better environment. Her words stung, but her intentions stung more. I knew she didn't just dislike me, she wanted me out of Leo's life. And slowly, painfully, I watched Leo slip further away from me, influenced by whispers I could never hear. But I had no idea that Myra's quiet hostility was only the beginning, because soon their intentions would turn into actions that would shake the very foundation of my world. Sometimes the people who sit across from you at the dinner table aren't building a future with you, they're quietly preparing to erase you from theirs. It began subtly, so subtly that I didn't recognize the storm forming around me. At first, it was just Leo's silence, a change in his voice, a lost warmth. Whenever Myra was around, he acted like he wasn't my son anymore, but someone performing a role that she silently scripted. One evening when they visited, I cooked Leo's favorite meal, potato stew with roasted herbs, something I'd made for him since childhood. The moment they walked in, Myra wrinkled her nose. "You still cook like this?" she asked, her tone dripping with ridicule. Leo's used to healthier food now. Leo simply nodded beside her, agreeing without even tasting the meal that once made his eyes sparkle. My heart sank, but I kept a smile. That's what mothers do, they swallow their pain quietly. As they sat on the couch, Myra began asking strange questions. "So, how much do you earn from sewing now? Can you even manage bills on your own at this age? Do you have any property in your name?" It felt less like curiosity and more like interrogation. Her eyes scanned my tiny home as if calculating its worth. Leo sat there silently, not defending me, not stopping her. That was the first time I felt a tiny crack in my heart. Days later, Leo asked to borrow my savings, a small amount I kept hidden inside an old wooden box. I used it for emergencies, for electricity bills, for medicines when I fell sick. He said he needed it urgently for a business opportunity. I hesitated. He'd never asked me for money before. Before I could answer, Myra stepped closer with that same cold smile. "It's not a big deal," she said. "It's not like you have much use for it." Her words sliced through me. Still, I gave Leo the money because I loved him. Because I believed he truly needed it, because mothers don't think twice when their children ask. But weeks passed, then months. He never mentioned returning it. That's when the next blow came. Leo stopped visiting altogether. Calls turned into short messages, then even those messages faded. I learned from a neighbor that Leo and Myra had moved into a nicer apartment, still struggling but living comfortably enough that my sacrifices seemed like distant memories to them. And yet, they never looked back at the woman who had built her entire life around them. For the first time, a lonely fear crept into my heart. What if my son wasn't being pulled away? What if he was choosing to leave? But the pain hadn't even started yet, because soon their silence would turn into a decision so cruel, so ruthless, it would change the rest of my life forever. It's strange how betrayal never arrives as thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing the face of the person you love the most. The day everything changed began like any other. I swept the small courtyard, washed the dishes, folded clothes, and prepared lentil soup for myself. It was a peaceful morning, one of those rare moments when my mind wasn't weighed down by Leo's absence. But peace has a way of shattering without warning. Around noon, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Leo and Myra stood outside. For a second, my heart fluttered with hope. Maybe they'd come to see me. Maybe my son missed me. Maybe the distance had softened something inside him, but their expressions were stiff, cold, as if they were here for business, not family. They didn't even step inside. "We need to talk," Leo said, looking everywhere except at me. Myra crossed her arms, her eyes scanning me like I was someone inconveniencing her. I invited them in because no matter how they treated me, they were still part of my heart. They stood awkwardly in the small living room, refusing to sit. Something in my chest tightened. Then Myra began speaking before Leo could. "Auntie," she said, her voice unnervingly calm, "you're getting older. It's not safe for you to live alone anymore. Leo and I have been discussing what's best for you." Her tone carried that familiar poison disguised as concern. Leo remained silent, like a shadow hiding behind her words. She continued, "We found a place for you. It's outside the city, a shared residence. You'll be with people your age, they'll take care of you." My body went numb, my mind echoed her words like distant thunder. A shared residence. As if I were a burden, as if they were sending me away. "I don't need anyone to take care of me," I whispered. "I can live here. This is my home." Myra's smile tightened. "We've already arranged everything. Already arranged. Already decided. Already planned without me." Finally, Leo stepped forward, his voice barely above a sigh. "Mom, it's better this way. You can't manage things alone anymore." His words broke something inside me because they weren't true. And he knew they weren't true. I looked at my son, hoping to find even a flicker of the little boy who once held my hand tightly. But all I saw was a man who had drifted too far to remember where he came from. They weren't asking. They were announcing, and I realized with painful clarity that I was being pushed out of my own life. But what happened next, the day they came to take me away, was far worse than the words they spoke. You never forget the day your loved ones stop seeing you as family and start treating you like responsibility they can't wait to discard. 3 days after that conversation, the inevitable happened. I woke up early, swept the porch, lit a small incense stick near my window, and tried to hold myself together. The morning felt heavy, almost as if the air itself knew something painful was about to unfold. Around mid-morning, I heard footsteps outside. When I opened the door, a small van stood there. Leo and Myra were beside it, along with 2 men from some agency I'd never heard of. They carried clipboards and wore polite but emotionless expressions, the kind you see in people who are just doing their job. My heart sank, not because I feared leaving my home, but because my son didn't even try to hide what he was doing. Leo stepped toward me, trying hard to avoid my eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "please pack a few essentials. They'll help with the rest later." "This is my house," I replied softly. "Where will I come back to?" He didn't answer. Myra interjected with a practiced sweetness that felt like a slap. You don't have to worry about any of that. They'll handle everything at the new place. You'll be fine there. Fine, that word echoed in my chest like a cruel joke. I looked around my little home, every corner carrying memories of the life I had built with broken hands. The kitchen where I'd prepared Leo's meals, the chair where I'd stitched clothes through endless nights, the window where I used to wait for him to return from school. Everything about to be taken away. One of the agency men gently nudged, "Ma'am, we have a schedule to follow." I wasn't ready. I wasn't strong enough, but no one cared. I picked up a small cloth bag, one I had used for years, and placed a few clothes inside. A sweater, a scarf, the frame of Leo's childhood picture. My fingers trembled as I held it. He was 6 in that photograph, smiling, innocent, arms wrapped around my neck. A version of him that no longer existed. As I stepped outside, the sun felt too bright, too harsh. They guided me into the van like someone fragile, someone who couldn't think or decide for herself. I stared out the window as my home, the place I had fought so hard to maintain, grew smaller and smaller behind me. And for the first time in decades, I felt completely alone, but being taken away was only the beginning. What awaited me at the new place was far darker, far more heartbreaking than anything I ever imagined. People think the deepest pain comes from losing a home, but the real wound is realizing you were never worth fighting for. The drive felt endless. The van moved along quiet roads lined with tall trees that seemed to lean inward, as if they too felt sorry for me. I clutched the small bag on my lap, my fingers gripping the fabric so tightly my knuckles turned pale. Every bump, every turn reminded me I was being taken somewhere I had never chosen. After nearly an hour, the van slowed and stopped in front of a dull, aging building. It wasn't broken down, but it carried a heaviness. Its walls were stained, its windows fogged, and the paint on the gate had peeled away like old skin. A signboard hung crookedly, reading Riverside Haven's Senior Care Home. My heart dropped, not because I feared the place, but because my own child believed I belonged here. One of the staff members opened the door for me. "Welcome," he said politely, as if this were a hotel. "Let's get you settled." I stepped out slowly, my legs threatening to give way. Leo and Myra stood behind me, watching with unreadable expressions, not guilt, not sadness. Just indifference. Inside, the air smelled of medicine and old memories. A few elderly people sat quietly in a hall, some staring into space, others watching television with vacant eyes. A nurse guided me to a small room at the end of the corridor. "This is yours," she said. A single bed, a metal wardrobe, a window that overlooked an empty backyard. Everything felt cold. I placed my bag on the bed. My hands shook as I unpacked the few belongings I had brought, the clothes, the scarf, and the photo of little Leo. I placed the frame near the window. It seemed out of place in such a lonely room. When I stepped outside again, I found Leo and Myra near the entrance, ready to leave. "You'll be fine here," Myra said, her tone painfully casual. "They'll take care of all your needs." Leo nodded without looking at me. "We'll visit soon," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. As they turned to leave, my heart ripped in a way I didn't know was possible. I wanted to run after them. I wanted to call his name. I wanted him to turn back just once. But he didn't. The van door closed, the engine roared, and they drove away, taking with them everything that once made my life meaningful. I stood there until the sound faded, until silence wrapped itself around me like a shroud. Only then did I whisper the words he would never hear. "You were my whole world, Leo." and the world had just abandoned me. But the real shock wasn't being left there. The real shock came later when I discovered why they truly sent me away. Sometimes truth doesn't arrive in a scream, it comes quietly, slipping through conversations you were never meant to hear. Days passed slowly inside Riverside Haven. The walls were always quiet, the hallways always echoing with faint whispers and old memories. I tried to adjust, telling myself that maybe Leo was right. Maybe I really wasn't capable of living alone anymore. But then I would look at my hands that had worked endlessly, hands that had raised a child, hands that had survived storms no one knew about. And I couldn't accept that these hands suddenly meant nothing. One afternoon, while I was sitting in the small common area, two nurses walked past me talking in low voices. They didn't notice I was within earshot. "It's strange," one said. Her son didn't even wait to finish the paperwork. They rushed everything. The other replied, "Well, he needed proof. You know, the financial grant case, they only approve it if the parent is listed as dependent." My heart froze. A cold tremor rushed through my chest. Financial grant? Dependent? What were they talking about? I leaned forward slightly, pretending to read the magazine in my lap. The first nurse continued, "He applied for that city housing scheme, the one that gives benefits if you're supporting an elderly dependent. They needed documents showing she couldn't live alone." The second sighed, "I hate when families do that. They get money, better rent, tax cuts, while the parent gets dumped into places like this." Their voices faded as they walked away, but the wounds their words carved remained deep and raw. My son, my Leo, hadn't sent me here because he worried about me. He sent me here because it got him money. Because listing me as a dependent helped him qualify for a government scheme. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was paperwork, a requirement, a means to an end. The realization shattered me in ways no heartbreak ever had. That evening, I sat by the window of my small room, staring at Leo's childhood picture. His tiny arms around my neck, his innocent smile, his soft hair brushing my cheek. I remembered every birthday I saved extra coins for, every night I stayed awake sewing, every fever I held him through. I gave him everything, and he traded me for a financial benefit. The tears wouldn't stop. Not because of where I was, but because I finally understood why. Love hadn't faded, it had been replaced by convenience, but even that painful truth was only the beginning. Because soon, I would uncover something even darker, something that revealed just how far they planned to go. Pain hits hardest when you realize the betrayal you uncovered is only a small piece of a much bigger cruelty waiting to unfold. After learning the truth behind why Leo sent me here, something inside me shifted. The sadness didn't disappear, it simply settled deeper, like a stone resting at the bottom of a river. I carried it quietly without letting anyone see the cracks forming inside me. I tried to adjust to the routines of Riverside Haven: breakfast at 7, a brief walk in the courtyard at 10, a bland lunch at noon. Evenings filled with soft murmurs of forgotten lives. Most of the residents had stories that had faded into silence. Some were abandoned. Some had no one left. Some had families who conveniently forgot they existed. And now I was one of them. One evening, while returning from the courtyard, I overheard two staff members discussing recent admissions. My name appeared. "Her room?" one asked, flipping through files. "Yes, ground floor," the other replied. "The son requested no calls unless it's an emergency." My heart tightened. No calls, no updates, no contact unless necessary. It felt like I'd been placed into a box and sealed away. Later that night, another conversation drifted into my ears, this time from the office near my room. I didn't intend to listen, but when I heard Leo's name, my steps froze. The manager spoke softly into the phone. "Yes, Mr. Leo, we received the documents you emailed. Don't worry, we'll update her status as fully dependent next week." Fully dependent, that wasn't true. I could walk, I could cook, I could live alone. I wasn't helpless. Why was he insisting on this? The manager continued. "Yes, the certification will increase your eligibility for the extended allowance. You'll receive the revised amount in 2 billing cycles." A wave of nausea washed over me. He wasn't just using my name, he was increasing the benefits, claiming I was incapable of anything to get more money. My son, my only child, the person I spent decades raising. Reducing me to a signature on a form, especially one built on lies. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I kept wondering how long Leo and Myra had planned this. Had he ever cared, or had I been blindly believing in a love that had already died? The room felt colder than usual. The silence felt heavier. And inside me, the truth settled like poison. They didn't send me here out of concern. They sent me here out of profit. But the darkest moment was still ahead. Because soon I would face a decision that would determine whether I remained silent or fought back against the very people I once lived for. There comes a moment when a broken heart stops begging to be seen and starts learning how to stand on its own. The next morning, the sun filtered weakly through the small window of my room, casting pale lines across the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photograph of little Leo, the child who once clung to my sari and refused to sleep unless my hand rested on his back. I held that photo tight. I needed strength from somewhere, anywhere. Because the truth was settling in deeper each day, I wasn't sent here out of love. I was placed here out of convenience and used here out of greed. But another truth began rising in me, a truth I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't powerless. After breakfast, I walked through the hallway with a new purpose. The same walls that once felt like cages now felt like witnesses to my awakening. I approached the administrative office, hesitating for only a second before knocking. A middle-aged receptionist looked up. "Yes, how can I help you? I want to see my file," I said. My voice was steady, firmer than I expected. She blinked, surprised. "Your file?" "Yes," I repeated, "all documents my son submitted." She hesitated, but after a moment she led me inside. She retrieved a folder labeled with my name and placed it on the desk. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, I saw forms stamped and signed, statements claiming I needed full-time supervision, medical reports marked with fabricated conditions, signatures I never wrote. Words describing me as fragile, confused, incapable. Each sentence felt like a blade. But something else caught my eye, a copy of the benefit certificate stating that Leo and Myra received a higher allowance because of my severe dependency. My breath hitched. Not only had they lied, they had exaggerated the lie to profit even more. For a long moment I sat silently, the papers spread before me, each one confirming the betrayal I had feared but never imagined. "Do you want to file a complaint?" the receptionist asked softly. Her voice was gentle. Maybe she'd seen this sort of thing too many times. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. A complaint meant consequences. Consequences meant conflict. And conflict meant losing whatever tiny connection I still had with my son. My heart warred with itself. One side begged for justice. The other begged to protect the last thread of hope I still held for Leo. I shook my head slowly. No, I whispered, not yet, because I needed time, I needed clarity, I needed to decide whether a mother's love was worth more than her own dignity. That night, I lay awake again. The room was dim, quiet, and still, but inside me something was changing. A fire was rising, soft but fierce. I wasn't ready to fight, but I was no longer willing to be silent. But fate had its own timing. Because in the next chapter of my life, something unexpected would happen, something that would force me to choose between holding onto my past or saving myself. Sometimes the ending you fear the most becomes the beginning you never knew you needed. The days that followed felt different, quiet, but no longer suffocating. I found myself watching the other residents more closely. So many had stories like mine, stories of being abandoned, forgotten, or pushed aside by the very families they had once carried on their backs. Their eyes held oceans of pain, yet they smiled through it, accepting life one fragile day at a time. But I didn't want to simply accept. Not anymore. One evening, as I walked in the small courtyard, an elderly woman named Salma joined me. She was soft-spoken, with silver hair braided neatly behind her back. She had seen me sitting alone for days and finally approached. "You're new here," she said gently. "Yes," I replied. "Against my choice." She nodded knowingly. "Most of us arrived that way, but you must remember we may be placed here by others, but how we live here, that choice is ours." Her words pierced through me like warm light. For months, I had felt like a prisoner in my own circumstances. But maybe, just maybe, I could choose differently. That evening, I returned to my room and sat by the window. I pulled out Leo's childhood photo one last time. His tiny, smiling face stared back at me, innocent, gentle, untouched by the world's hardships. I realized something important. I had been holding onto a version of my son who no longer existed. The man he had become was not the child I raised, and loving a memory shouldn't mean losing myself in the present. With trembling hands, I placed the photo in my drawer, not to forget him, but to release the pain attached to it. For the first time in years, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The next morning, I approached the receptionist again. "I want to update my file," I said, my voice steady. "I want it to reflect the truth." She looked at me, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Whatever happens after that, I will face it." Because I realized something powerful: silence protects no one. Pain left unspoken only grows sharper. And dignity is worth defending, even against the ones you love. As I signed the correction documents, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me control over my life again. And maybe someday Leo would understand, maybe not, but either way I would survive, and I would rebuild myself stone by stone, breath by breath. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. And if this story touched your heart, remember, every chapter of pain carries a hidden strength. Sometimes we must lose everything to finally find ourselves. Thank you so much for watching this video. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Book. Like the video, comment your thoughts, and share your feelings in the comments.